Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Pat Flynn. We are going to talk about four views or four perspectives on the problem of evil, the perennial challenge to theistic belief. How is it, somebody who's skeptical might wonder, that there can be a God who is all good and all powerful, who's the creator of everything that exists apart from, of course, himself? How can that be the case, and yet look around, that there is uh, that there are evils of any kind, let alone the specific types and the amount of evil that we see in this world. I think the problem of evil is a very important thing to consider. I think it's a serious problem on different levels. It's a serious problem because it's a problem existentially. All of us struggle with the problem of evil on some level, even if not intellectually. All of us throughout our lives are in the grips of suffering. So I think that, because I obviously believe that God and evil are compatible, I believe that there's good reasons that God has created this world and has allowed suffering. So if nothing else, I think it's really important to think deeply about this, um, because I think that there's much spiritual fruit that can be had once we can understand or get some grasp on what some of the reasons might be of why God allows suffering. So what I want to do in this episode, this will be a brief episode, by the way. I'm not going to detail or defend these different views on the problem of evil. Mostly, I just want to show you that there are different views on the problem of evil, and then point you in the direction of some different books and articles that build these different views out. In fact, I was writing a brief blog post this morning. The Substack is coming back, and it was on this very topic. And I said, I think this would make for a good short episode. And the blog post, I'll pull it up here. You can get a peek of it in its edited format. Is called, you guessed it, Four Solutions or Four Views on the Problem of Evil. So let's dive right in. This will be a brief episode. I'm actually traveling to Baton Rouge this week, so this will be a short week in terms of podcast material. But I wanted to get a couple of things out. So let me see if I can make this a little bit larger. So if you're watching, you can read along. If not, I will. I'll be sure to read everything that's actually on the screen. So atheists, they do want to say that the problem of evil disconfirms theism, but this comes in different degrees of strength. There's of course the strong form problem of evil, which argues that there is just something impossible about the existence of God coexisting with suffering and evil, or the world that we're in. Call that the logical problem of evil. There's actually just something contradictory about that. It cannot be the case. I think it should be acknowledged, and I think most people do acknowledge that most skeptics have sort of moved away from that stronger form problem of evil. Every once in a while, you get to rejuvenate it or resuscitate it, but I think it always runs into the same difficulty of really establishing what that contradiction is, or what that contradiction is supposed to be. So rather, what's happened is skeptics and atheists have moved more towards these evidential problems of evil, where they'll say, okay, maybe it doesn't strictly disprove the existence of God, the types or the amount of evil we see in the world, but it would just seem to make the God hypothesis, as it were, just virtually impossible. Maybe, like, it's just so improbable that there's no good reason to believe it. That would be on the stronger end of that. Others may say, yeah, maybe it doesn't make it virtually impossible, but it's a weight in the scale. It's evidence against to some degree. So again, different atheists, different skeptics, even different agnostics think about the problem of evil in different ways, or that it has different degrees of force. I mean, some really think that even the evidential problem of evil just drives the probability of God essentially right into the basement, right? Others are much more moderate. They say, it lowers the likelihood of theism, but maybe not dramatically, right? So that's just all some general stage setting. And what I want to do is I want to think about how theists have responded. And when I was thinking about a different article that I'm writing, actually a much more detailed article on the problem of evil, it struck me that it seems to me by my count that there's sort of 4 big camps or 4 general ways of handling the problem of evil. And these are what I want to bring to your attention. And what I'm gonna suggest at the end is they're not necessarily incompatible. And I think with certain qualifications, I actually think they're all true. So let's just go through them one by one. All right. So here's one way of dealing with the problem of evil, and that is that we'll just argue that there's already reason to think that God exists. Maybe we have a metaphysical demonstration, right? So think some of the traditional metaphysical arguments, right? And what this should do is it should cause us to realize, well, look, if I already know that God exists through metaphysical demonstration, if I know God is actual, and I know that suffering is actual, well, if 2 things are actual, then their togetherness must be possible. So it must be possible that God and evil can coexist. And what I should do is I should privilege what is more clear to reason, right? So if you actually think, and this would be from your perspective, if you think that there are clear, good arguments for God's existence, especially the sort of the metaphysical demonstrations, and that's clear to you, then what you should do is you should privilege that over these more evidential arguments, over these sort of the cumulative case approach. And you should realize, well, look, God exists. We live in a world full of suffering. They're both actual, so they must be compatible, right? And then maybe just sort of leave it at that. And in fact, that's sort of the approach that a lot of traditional Thomists and metaphysicians take. In fact, it's the approach that Ed Feser takes in 5 proofs, because he's going to say, look, we've got at least 5 metaphysical demonstrations for the existence of God here. You really can't escape these except on really pain of incoherence. We can show that the logical problem of evil doesn't go through. Feser specifically addresses Mackey's logical problem of evil in here. And so he's going to say, well, we should privilege the deeper metaphysical account that gives us God's existence over the sort of suggestion that evil counts as evidence away from the existence of God. So this doesn't give you a kind of warm and cozy story about why God allows evil. It's just saying you should privilege what is more clear or clearer to reason over that which is less clear, right? So if you think that there are good arguments, especially metaphysical proofs in the way that term is traditionally understood in metaphysics for the existence of God, then the sort of evidential problem of evil, like that actually shouldn't bother you, is sort of what this is. Unless at first those proofs were taken down. If those proofs could be taken down, then you would swing back around and maybe have reason to be bothered by the evidential arguments from evil. But so long as you think that those proofs are there and they stand strong, then it's reason to, again, afford privileging to that perspective. Do we see? Hopefully that makes sense. And I haven't had all my coffee this morning, so just bear with me, right? Also, I had too much candy yesterday for Valentine's Day. Oh, heavens. Okay, so that's the first way of thinking about this, and that's a very traditional way. And I think if you want to learn or read more about that approach, Feser's book 5 Proofs is good there. Okay, second approach is just to argue that it's actually it's a complete category mistake to assume that God has obligations to creation, or that God is a moral agent like we as human beings are moral agents. So it's just a complete error to think that we can sort of impose moral obligations, certainly moral obligations that we're under as human beings, onto God as the wellspring of all existence and creation to begin with. And somebody who argues this very vigorously is Brian Davis in his book The Reality of God and the Problem of Evil. He is pretty adamant about saying God is not a moral agent, right? And trying to impugn God because God, may have violated certain moral principles that are relevant to us in virtue of having a human nature is itself just a complete category mistake. So what Davis is arguing is that this whole thing is just completely ill-founded, right? There's no problem of evil as it's sort of commonly understood, because it makes certain assumptions about God, that God is a moral agent like we are moral agents, or that God has certain moral obligations to creation. that Davis is just willing to just burn all that, just burn all that down. Now, this sounds like a very cold approach, but I actually do think that it's correct. I think it is a category mistake to think that God is a moral agent like we are moral agents. And remember, the problem of evil, when we're addressing it philosophically, is not necessarily to give somebody the warm and fuzzies. We're really just trying to ask, with our little philosopher caps on, is there some reason to think that God and evil or God and suffering can't coexist, or that evil and suffering is evidence to whatever degree against the existence of God? And of course, Davis is still going to say, look, we've got the deeper metaphysical reasons to believe that God exists, and we should definitely not think of God as a moral agent to begin with. So to think that we can, indict God because he doesn't follow something like the Pauline principle or something like that, Davis is saying that's a complete category mistake. Another good example of this is Phaser has a response, and it was in the journal Religions, to James Sturba, who is somebody who really tried to once again resuscitate the stronger form logical problem of evil. And Phaser gives a sort of a briefer exposition of Davis's position in that article. So I'll link all these resources afterwards. In fact, I'll just publish the Substack, and I'll link the Substack because I have links to all these books and articles if you want to explore and dive deeper into each of these approaches. It's important to understand that perspective number 2 is technically, it's not skeptical theism, right? They're different. Skeptical theism, I didn't actually even include on this list. I want to do a separate talk about skeptical theism. I have my own concerns about that approach, but this is actually just more of a traditional Thomistic understanding of God, the nature of God, what the nature of morality is and moral obligations is flowing from particular natures, and making sure that we're not slipping into category errors, and maintaining a properly transcendent view of God, right? That's kind of Davis's approach. So that's number 2. And I do recommend this book very highly. I think it is a really important perspective on the problem of evil. Some people don't like it because they think it's a little too cold, and I can appreciate that. But I do think that it is correct. I do think it is correct that it is a mistake to think that God is a moral agent like we are moral agents. That doesn't mean that we can't have any broad moral expectations of God. I think we can, but we have to really qualify that and massage that in important ways. Okay, so that's number 2. Now we're going to be getting into so I guess number 1 and 2, you could call those like the cold responses, right? They're not really pastoral in any sense. They might not make you feel any better, when you're afflicted with terrible amounts of suffering, but they are sort of a cold, abstract philosophical analysis saying, look, here's why it's a mistake to think that evil disconfirms God. Okay, those are the first 2. The second 2, I guess maybe get increasingly warmer. So here's number 3. And number 3 would take this approach. The third perspective would say something like this. Look, the problem of evil is actually not as expected on, say, mindless naturalism as it may initially seem. And in fact, it's better expected on theism, even if we say that it's not highly expected. Now, if you've followed me for any length of time, if you've read my published work on this, then you know I take this approach in a number of places in a number of different ways. And I'm actually writing something of an extended Substack article to clarify my position on this a little bit. So the idea here is this: is like, look, upon deeper analysis, once we kind of get into the theoretical details, it's just gonna turn out that naturalism itself really doesn't predict the problem of evil, that it's caught up in so many sort of insuperable barriers to entry to even get into the problem of evil, that if naturalism were true, I really wouldn't expect there to be a problem of evil at all, right? And I've talked about this at length, why I think that's the case. I'll mention a few brief reminder points at the end. But the general thrust is this: is like, even if you thought that the probability of encountering the problem of evil as we encounter it is low given the existence of God, as it turns out, upon deeper analysis, it would be even lower if God did not exist. So in that sense, it sort of alleviates the threat, right? And we might even say that evil, in light of our total understanding, actually points toward rather than away from the existence of God. I've taken that approach myself. Other thinkers who take this approach would be Josh Rasmussen. He's got at least one article on this, and he develops it more at length towards the end of his book, How Reason Can Lead to God. My good buddy and co-host, Dr. Jim Madden, he's got a recent article taking this approach, arguing against Paul Draper, that even the qualitative experience of pain is better expected on theism than atheism. So the idea here is like, look, you might think initially that the problem of evil or suffering or pain would be more expected on a principle of indifference or naturalism. But once we really start to get into the weeds of the theory, we're going to see that a lot already needs to be in place to even get the problem of evil started. And naturalism just can't account really for any of that. So point number 3 is saying that even if you thought that the likelihood of evil was low given the existence of God, it's even lower on naturalism. And it's really that ratio that matters. By the way, I've done 2 interviews the past 2 weeks. I'll link those as well, where I give more of a detailed overview of my position on point number 3. One was on the Gordian Knot podcast with my buddy Jake. I'll give a shout out to him. And another was on the Logos Project podcast with Dom. So if you want to go a little bit deeper into number 3 and 4, I'll link those resources for you. Okay, so number 4 then just goes a little bit further, and it would say, actually, the problem of evil is highly expected, if not entailed, by theism, given a certain, or we would say correct, understanding of God, creature, and the human person. Now, some examples of this would be Trent Doherty's book, which is a phenomenal book. It's on animal suffering. And he's going to argue, given the right understanding of God and creation, we should actually expect pretty much the world that we see, a really high degree of expectation. And then he goes on to build out and defend a theodicy that actually includes a theodicy for animals, including animal resurrection and deification. It's a really well done book. I actually highly recommend Doherty's book. So Doherty is going to argue that, again, given the right understanding of God and creation and this little theodicy that he talks about, the problem of evil is better expected on theism than atheism. That theism actually better predicts the world we see with all of its suffering and evil than atheism. So in that sense, it's going to tip the scales. That would be Doherty's approach, and he's focusing on animal suffering. But another really good one, in fact, I have it right here, that I would say kind of falls into this camp is this might be my number 1 pick on the problem of evil. I've talked about it before. Is Eleanor Stump's Wandering in Darkness. Just a magisterial work, and it's so systematic because Stump goes into the nature of love, the nature of goodness, the nature of union, the nature of fallible libertarian agency, and how God guides his creatures, and how God works on the will, not through efficient, but through formal causality. So it's so systematic. But I love that, right? Because I love system builders. But then what it's going to do is it's going to do the work that we need to argue point number 4 here, that the world we see, given a proper understanding of God, also a proper understanding of love, freedom of the will between impeccable and peccable creatures, leads us to a very high degree of expectation of the type of world that we see. So I think Stumps would fairly fit into point number 4. As well. So I hope that's clear, right? Let me just summarize these 4 positions, and then I want to say I don't think they're incompatible, right? So just to review quickly, number 1 says, look, there's just already good reasons in place, call them metaphysical demonstrations that show to us that God is actual, and if 2 things are actual, their togetherness must be possible. So there's just not an incompatibility between God and the evil and suffering we experience in the world. We privilege what is clear over what is unclear. Got it. Number 2 says it's just a category mistake to think that God is a moral agent to begin with, that he bears obligations to creation. That's the approach that Brian Davis takes. Phaser picks it up as well, and many other Thomists. So this is a very traditional perspective as well. So they're really arguing that just right from the start, the whole problem of evil is just fundamentally misguided, right? Number 3 argues that, okay, even if you thought that the amount of suffering and evil we experience in this world were low given the existence of God. It's actually even lower without the existence of God. So, upon deeper analysis, it flips the scales the other way. And then, let me scroll down here. And then point number 4, actually says we shouldn't think that the suffering and evil we experience in this world is low on theism. In fact, we should think that it's actually highly expected, if not entailed, by not just the existence of God, but given that God has created a world. And then I pointed to Doherty's work and Stump's work on that. Okay, so let me just finish off with a few considerations, and if you guys have any questions or anything, we can jam around for a few minutes. Then I got to go. Then I got to hop on my other channel and do a fitness podcast on kettlebells. Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Happy St. Valentine. St. Valentine's Day. My wife made me some fried eggs with heart-shaped bacon. She's so wonderful. She's so wonderful. Okay, so what I want to say is I don't think that these approaches are incompatible. In fact, I think they're all with certain qualifications true. So I think it's right to say that we should privilege the deeper metaphysical case for God over the evidential arguments from evil against God. That just seems right to me. That does seem clearer to reason. And in fact, it is something that was personally convincing to me. I used to be an atheist. I used to be a naturalist. And then it just seemed like, yeah, this seems a lot more obvious to me. This seems a lot more clear to reason. The sort of underlying metaphysics that really just entails the existence of God. It's not clear to me, at least not immediately, that God and evil are strictly incompatible. So I am just going to privilege what is clear over what is unclear. And unless I had reason to doubt or disregard the metaphysical analysis, then I should not really be bothered by the evidential arguments from evil. That does seem right to me. It still seems right to me to this day. However, I think it also seems right to me that it is a mistake to think that God is a moral agent like us, and that we can consistently maintain that God is the creator of the natural moral law. Because that's part of the problem, right? Is that we're imposing aspects of the natural moral law onto God. But what Davis and Fazer and other Thomists are going to argue is that just as God is the creator of all the physical laws, right? He's the creator of the natural moral law, and he's no more subject to the natural moral law than he is to any of the physical laws for obvious reasons. And that does seem right to me. That does seem right to me. Again, it doesn't mean that we can't have any broad expectations of God. I think we can. But we have to appropriately qualify them, I think, in the way that Davis does in his book, right? And that, of course, is going to do a lot of work in alleviating the difficulty or dissolving. That's what Fazer calls it, a way of he calls it the Thomistic dissolution of the problem of evil. Just completely dissolves it. And I do think that's right. I do. Again, people might think it's a cold response, but we're just trying to see where reason leads on this, and that does seem true. However, I think we can still go further, and we can do that deeper analysis, and that the theist can argue that the conditions for even the possibility of any problem of evil emerging, conditions such as conscious, rational agents, I would argue freedom of the will, a contingent universe, a fine-tuned universe, moral principles, moral knowledge, and the integration of all of these. Are you kidding me? Like, would I ever expect any of that on naturalism? No, I wouldn't, right? So that all those conditions that need to be in place, even for the problem of evil to emerge, are so enormously low on naturalism that I think that there just wouldn't even be a problem of evil if naturalism were true at all. I don't think it could ever even come online. Certainly, I would not expect anybody to experience evil while judging it as such if naturalism were true. But it does seem right to me to think that God would see the goodness in a lot of the things I just talked about and bring it about, so that way the conditions for evil are online. That even if initially I didn't think that there was a high likelihood that we would have this much suffering evil in our world, it does seem right to say that the ratio favors theism no matter what, because it would be so much less likely if mindless naturalism were true. So I think that's right. But I think we can still consistently maintain, then going further, picking up from Doherty and Stump, that the more we think about the nature of God, the nature of a material world, as some things decrease, other things decrease, the nature of agency, the nature of God's rationality, of what it would mean to be governed by a perfectly rational, perfectly wise, perfectly just being, that the suffering of the sort we experience is actually highly expected on the theistic hypothesis, but that this also gives us reason to suspect, in fact, to be extremely confident that this phase of life is transitional and developmental, that this life isn't all there is. And that, of course, is something that Doherty argues at length, and Eleanor Stump, and many other theists. And that seems right to me. And I think that that final perspective can tie it all together, because it's not as cold. It's not as cold. And I think it gives us a great hope, and it gives us a great optimism that we can say, yeah, all those other considerations are correct, but this life isn't all there is. This life is not all there is. This life is transitional. It's developmental. There are greater goods, specifically logically dependent goods, right? That are just sort of concomitant, right? With there being at least the possibility of failure and evil, that wouldn't be online, right? Unless God permitted the possibility of evil and failure. And I've gone through those at length in other episodes. I also have a blog post on my Substack called God and Evil and Logically Dependent Goods, if you want an analysis of that. So I guess my final thought here is that you could take any one of these four views. I think that they all have great merit. But me personally, I don't think that they're incompatible. I actually think that they're with appropriate qualification and fitting, some moves of fittingness. I actually think that they're all true. So the books I recommended one more time and are The Reality of God and the Problem of Evil, Phaser's 5 Proofs, Wandering in Darkness by Stump, Doherty's The Problem of Animal Suffering book, and what was the other one? What was, somebody remind me? There was Josh Rasmussen's How Reason Can Lead to God. There's a lot of other ones out there that are really good as well. But I think the ones I recommended, will give you at least an introduction to these 4 different ways of thinking about the problem of evil on top of this video. So let's take a few comments and questions. All right. Brendan says, love this show. Love you, man. Love you. Thanks for being here on this Monday morning. Parisa says, what about Gavin's approach regarding privation theory of evil? There is no problem of evil because there is no evil, if I understood him correctly. Yeah, so I didn't include this because, well, I guess we should say that there's problems of evil, right? So there's the metaphysical problem of evil. Look, if God is the cause of everything that exists apart from himself, and evil exists, well, then does that make God the cause of evil? And that's where the privation theory of evil comes in, because they're going to say that whatever else evil is, we should probably classify it as a logical being, right? It's always sort of parasitic on the good. Evil is a do-good gone missing, like blindness or a hole in the sock, or the failure to consider the moral principle or moral rule in a particular judgment. So upon final analysis, evil is always sort of a hole in being. Right? Maybe it started as a negation, but then at a certain time, some being was due, and then it's absent, and then it becomes a privation. So Gavin's approach, and I think that's right. I defend the privation theory of evil. I actually should have an article coming out on that fairly soon. That would just be concerning the problem of evil as on a deeper metaphysical analysis between God's universal causality and the order of being. And it's saying that good and evil are not on an ontological par at all, right? Evil is always sort of parasitic, or it's a lesion. And it's certainly, and we would say that this is true, obviously, conceptually. For there to be any badness, we need some prior good, right? If somebody destroys somebody's face, we say that's bad because their face was good. And then the privation theory of evil will just say, well, yeah, it's conceptually prior because it's metaphysically prior, right? But that doesn't really answer, I don't think, or it doesn't go far enough in answering the broader concern, which is, well, why would God create a world with so many holes in it, right? Because those holes still make all the difference at the end of the day, right? Yeah, okay, the hole in my sock isn't something with positive being, but it's still, the reason my foot gets frostbit, and the holes make all the difference, right? So we want to be careful. We're not saying that like evil is just completely an illusion, and it doesn't have these terrible effects that we think that it has. So we still want to go further and give an account of why would God create a world with holes in it, with privations in it, right? And that's where all the other considerations that I've been talking about come in. So yeah, no, good question, and hopefully that clarifies some of it. Parisa says, please do a podcast on the atonement and its role in the problem of evil. Yeah, I think obviously Stump's book, Atonement, is one of my favorites on this, and that really is an extension of her book, Wandering in Darkness. Again, what I love about Stump is she's such a systematic thinker. She's consistent with all of her work, and she's always kind of building upon her previous contributions and tying everything together. So it's just so awesome when people do that, because it tells me they're really just trying to get the world as a whole right. They're not just looking for any kind of piecemeal solution they can at any point. So yeah, I didn't even bring up Christianity that much in particular, not because I don't think that you can, but I guess I'm sort of thinking from the perspective of a bare theism. I actually think that Christianity only helps and gives more resources to the problem of evil, especially by showing that God is not by any means indifferent to our suffering, and that we have this just radical, tremendous outpouring of love, this promise of deep union and deification, so important. And I think that Christianity gives us the resources to have great confidence and hope that all evil will be defeated, as is beautifully displayed at the sort of the end of, and of course, an allegorical way at the end of the movie, The Return of the King. So yeah, no, I guess I just have been thinking about this from a sort of a bare theism perspective. But I think Christians can certainly pull resources from their paradigm, from our paradigm. I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, right? That's going to further help with this. And that's what Stump does in Atonement. Atonement is a work of philosophical theology, working within this sort of theological system, bringing the tools of philosophy to bear to check for consistency and coherence and solutions to various problems. It's really a tremendous work. I would love to have Dr. Stump on this show, actually, to discuss that at some point. I know she's a very, very busy woman, but that would be a conversation I would love to have. So maybe we can arrange that. Okay, Parisa says, we'll take one or two more here. What is the difference between the defense against the problem of evil and the theodicy? Yeah, good question. So the difference is really this, right? Is a defense is saying, okay, the skeptic is pushing the problem of evil, and we understand that they, since they're advancing the argument, they sort of have the burden of proof. And a defense just really blocks the argument. It says, look, here's why your argument doesn't go through. This premise is false, or you haven't established this, or you haven't justified that, right? So a defense isn't necessarily worried about giving a story that is probably true of why God allows the suffering and evil in the world, right? Because it doesn't have to, right? It just has to block the argument of evil, and that's enough. In fact, if you go to Phaser's 5 proofs, that's all he does is he gives a defense. He gives a defense against Mackey's logical problem of evil. He does talk about the evidential problem of evil a little bit, and then says, look, since we've defended against this, since this argument clearly doesn't go through, well, that's why we privilege the arguments that do go through for the existence of God, right? So all you need really is a defense. But a defense can be kind of unsatisfying, can be kind of cold, because it doesn't really try to give a deeper account. And that's when a theodicy comes in. So theodicy is a little story, right? But it's more than a little story, because hopefully it's a story we think is at least plausibly, if not probably true, for why God allows suffering and evil in the world, either in general or in particular instances. So even though Eleanor Stump talks about her book a lot as a defense, certainly I think it blurs the lines. I think a lot of her book is a theodicy, and certainly in Atonement there is a theodicy. There are deeper reasons given that she thinks are true for why God allows this universe to have all the imperfections that it does, and reasons tied deeply into, of course, the nature of justification and how God works with the human will, and how suffering can be medicinal, that God will allow suffering for individuals if and only if it can deliver some outweighing benefit primarily to the individual. And she's focused on rational human adults in that. But I think it's also important to understand that, and I say this in another article I'm writing, I think it would be a mistake to think that there's just one reason that God allows suffering and evil. So a theodicy, a good one to me, would want to try to give a plausible or probable story for different aspects of the problem of evil and the different reasons that those might be there. So to contrast with Stump's account, actually, Peter van Inwagen has a very interesting response to the problem of evil, where he focuses on the issue of vagueness. Don't really want to get into that now, but he brings in the issue of vagueness actually to kind of say, I guess we would classify his response in the kind of cold category, that there might actually not be a reason why this bad thing happened to this particular person. But there's a reason why there might not be a reason for that. And the reason has to do with the general issue of vagueness. It's a very subtle, very clever, I think very profound account that I think actually, again, has a lot of truth to it. But Van Inwagen's trying to say, well, there's actually a reason why it might be a mistake to think that there would be a reason for evil or suffering in any particular instance. There's a good reason that there would be a world that generally actually would have to have a high level of suffering and evil. Again, given certain theological considerations. But due to issues of vagueness, Van Inwagen wants to argue, we might have reason to think that there isn't a reason for any particular instance. So actually, I'm not sure if him and Stump are compatible or not, but they're both worth reading on that. So that's the difference. A defense is just meant to block the argument. A theodicy is meant to go further and say, okay, now let's really try and give a plausible or even probably true story about God and how he relates to creation and why, more specifically, why we might we live in the type of world that we do. All right, last one, then I got to sign off. Pumpkin Pummler says, what, in your view, is the worst defense against the problem of evil? Oh, boy, there's a lot of bad ones out there. But what's the worst? What is the worst one? Help me out here, guys. I try not to read bad material anymore. I have to maybe try and think back. What is the worst? Well, I mean, I'm not a fan of just like the quick free will defense. I've never been a fan of just like the quick free, just because of free will. And my sympathies are certainly with Mackie, that it does seem quite possible that God could create free creatures that just sort of always did the morally right thing. Or at least he could give them the grace to always do the morally right thing, and it wouldn't be incompatible with their freedom. So I think to get the free will defense back online as a plausible option, what you need, again, is a deeper metaphysical system like Thomism. And then you have to defend something like what I've called the soft free will defense. And you have to argue for a certain metaphysical structure to the world where there's just, for example, only one being of pure actuality, which is God. Anything God creates is always going to be an act potency composite. Potency always sort of enables the conditions for privation, right? So the possibility of defect is really sort of always there, concomitantly, inevitably with anything that God creates, because only God can be purely actual. And then only God's will is impeccable, because only God is subsistent goodness itself. So any other free will that God creates is going to be naturally peccable, naturally fallible. So God, could God give the graces to everybody? Like as Catholics believe, we think he gave those graces to our Blessed Mother to avoid sin, sure. But I think there's a deeper principle at work, that God in the general run is going to guide things according to their nature, because it would sort of be nonsense to guide things not according to their nature. You can do miracles here and there as are appropriate, and you make the occasional, cow talk or something like that, right? But in the general run, a wise God governs things according to their nature. We have a fallible nature. In the general run, he's going to permit the possibility of our failure, because that's a good thing. And certainly we need to have the highest good, which is intimate love and union with God. We do need independent wills, correct? So I think we can give a deeper metaphysical story that enables a free will defense that is consistent and coherent and actually does a lot of work, and would completely respond to the way that Mackie objects to the free will defense. But I'm not a fan of just the quick, cheap, oh, it's because of free will, right? Yeah, no, that does not, that has never um, struck me as a particularly satisfying response. But I guess what's the lesson from that? The lesson from that is just do metaphysics. Because if you do deeper metaphysics and you roll up your sleeves and you try and just carve reality at its joints, then I think you'll just have the types of resources on hand automatically that if you encountered something like Mackey's logical problem of evil, you would just be able to see right through it in a way that I have just inadequately attempted to explain. Another thing that I worry about with certain defenses. Oh yeah, one thing that I find that I don't like in terms of defense of the problem of evil is that I guess two things, right? One is that like God would aim for some evil to bring about some greater good, right? Like God would aim for a genocide so some people could be courageous. That strikes me as laughably absurd and atrocious for many reasons. Now, look, I think that there are obviously logically dependent goods that could only come online with particular failures, and like really good goods, like courage, like mercy, like compassion, empathy, and indeed the incarnation and atonement. However, I also want to say that we have to get our sort of priority right here. I think what God is aiming for, and Maritan's great on this, is friendships, love, and communion, the highest good of all. Now, that again is going to require the coming online of at least two independent free wills. But because only God's will is impeccable, ours is peccable. We can fail, we have failed, and then from that, God can work with our failures to bring about these these greater goods, these logically dependent goods. But I think we have to, and we should say that what God is aiming for is love, and that's beautiful. That has the ring of truth, and that it's just sort of a metaphysical constraint, right? That we're naturally fallible. It's an obvious fact that we have failed. God works with that. He can work with that in his omnipotence. So those would just be some thoughts about how I would not approach the problem of evil. But where there's like still some truth in those types of responses. We just have to be more subtle and sophisticated about it. So, all right, one more and I'm signing off. I know I'm having too much fun. Andy says, coming in late, so we'll find out if you covered this. Did you listen to Jim's chat this weekend? He mentions how skeptical theism can undermine the whole theistic project, which was interesting. No, I did not listen to it. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts because I don't really have a commute. I'll try to because of course I love Jim. And but yeah, I've got my own concerns about skeptical theism. And Irish, you did miss this. I did not put skeptical theism on my sort of list for reasons that I did not discuss. But I've got a number of concerns about skeptical theism, and I hope to do a fuller episode on skeptical theism in the future. But I think I probably know what Jim would say about that, because Jim is the type of guy who wants to say, look, there has to be some threshold that we can cross where you would throw up your hands and be like, okay, I was wrong. And probably Jim's worry is that for some people in the circle of skeptical theism, it seems like there's just no line that could be crossed, right? It's just like, even if you woke up in a world, right, where there's just the example we give is just like sort of one burning kitten for all eternity. It seems like if that was the world we were in, like that, then we should have serious concerns. Right now, look, I don't think that's a possible world, so I'm just going to play modal skeptic there. But I think Jim's point is well taken, that for anybody in any paradigm or any worldview, I think we should be able to draw some line, right? Or say like, look, if this happened, and maybe I don't think it ever will happen. Maybe I think it's impossible. But like, if this happened, I would have to throw up my hands and say, yeah, my theory has been falsified or made at least far less probable than I originally thought that it was. So maybe that was what Jim said. I don't know because I haven't heard the conversation, but Jim and I have had those types of conversations before. Wow, this went a lot longer than I thought it would. I was honestly expecting this to be like a 10-minute chat where I just quickly listed these 4 views and gave you guys some resources. But I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting. The problem of evil is something I've obviously thought about for many, many, many years, for a long time. I think that there's good reason to take this very seriously, because from working with problems and wrestling with problems and puzzles, I've found that great fruit and great clarification, and oftentimes many great treasures can come out of that. And working with the problem of evil, obviously, I don't think it disconfirms God. I think it can actually help you to really sharpen other things that might be left unsharpened. God's nature, God's relation to creation, human nature, the purpose of creation, what love is, what the nature of love is, what the nature of good is. Thinking about the problem of evil forces you to think deeply about all these things, and I think bring them into greater focus. And in the end, I think it can, again, bring a lot of really important treasures to you. So yeah, I'll leave it with that. If you guys enjoy this, please drop your comments afterwards. Please like and share. If you'd like to see a future episode on any one of these accounts, I'd be happy to do it. Let me know which ones you're interested in. I know we already got a vote for the atonement. I'll see if I could maybe get Dr. Stump on at some point to talk about her work on that. If not, then maybe I'll just do the best I can to summarize her very excellent book, Atonement. In the meantime, thank you all. God bless. We'll catch you next time on Philosophy for the People.